I want to introduce to you a very good man. He is a devout member of the LDS Church, and he has served on several bishoprics. He is also very familiar with the immigration issue from a free market thinking standpoint, as well as a devout member of the LDS Church standpoint. He is a trial lawyer as well, and some of the awards that he has received and has been recognized for are the Southwest Super Lawyers magazine. He was a super lawyer in 2007 through 2011, and the American Litigation Association, and he was selected as one of Arizona's finest lawyers, a peer-reviewed designation. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Daryl Williams, please.
You know, last summer, one of my brothers in my family called me up and asked me to be a Minuteman to go down to the border and protect our border in the South. And he started sending me a lot of emails about that because he thought that that was something that I ought to do. And I got to tell you, I grew up in an environment where when I was a little kid I had guns, and I loved it. Dad's on a farm in Wyoming, and I'm kind of the Wild West free spirit. I made a mistake though. I went to law school. And then the mistake I made after that was I became a trial lawyer. So I tried over 150 jury trials in my career. And as a part of being a trial lawyer, I've had to look very critically at not only what I am doing, but what the other side is doing. Because, well, you got to make sure the other side's telling the truth. And you got to make sure that you're telling the truth. And you got to make sure that there's a basis for what you are saying, because it's very easy when you are in the courtroom to have the other side try to pull a fast one on you. And so I work very hard to be very prepared so that what I do is consistent with what my beliefs and my views are. I wasn't going to be a trial lawyer when I started out. I was going to be an economist. I was studying economics at BYU. And was a thesis short of a master's degree in microeconomic theory. And my new wife couldn't understand what economics was. And so she persuaded me to take the bar exam, because BYU was going to have a brand new law school starting in 1973. And I had no interest in being a lawyer, but to keep peace in my new marriage, I went and took the LSAT exam, and I did reasonably well on that. And a few months later, I was down in the computer labs in the Jessenite building at BYU, running computer regressions for econometric theories that I had come up with. And she called me up. She says, "You got to come home. We're going to dinner." I says, "What do you mean we're going to dinner? We can't afford the dinner. I couldn't afford to buy gas for our car." She says, "Well, you got to come home, put on your suit. We're going to dinner." And I went home, and Rex Lee, who was the dean of the law school, invited us to dinner because he was recruiting students for a brand new law school. And the next thing I knew, I was enrolled in the law school, although I was going to go to the University of Chicago and study under Milton Friedman and Paul Samuelson and be an economist. And so then I was so naive about being a lawyer that I didn't know that lawyers did anything other than what Perry Mason did. So people say, "What do you want to do when you become a lawyer?" And I said, "Well, go to the courtroom." And they said, "Oh, you don't want to be," and I discovered to my wonder that there are all kinds of lawyers, and a very small percentage of them are trial lawyers. Most of them work in the office, do transactions, I don't know what they do. But what I do, I'm involved in conflict resolution. I sue people and I get sued. And I have been involved in some very complicated matters. I one time tried a jury trial that lasted 10 months. And every day I would go to court for 10 months. I've tried jury trials in Arizona, and Texas, California, Utah, and around, and I just so love it. It is interesting to me, though, what happens in the courtroom, because I'm not sure that the courtroom is a place where you get right or wrong, truth or justice. You get win or lose in the courtroom, because you cannot educate a jury with everything that they really ought to do to make an intelligent decision. So I was very interested when I occasioned upon this, and I'm a voracious reader, by the way. I occasioned upon this statement here by our good friend Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud published this in 1922. And I thought it was truly extraordinary, because he recognized what happens when you're talking to a group of people. And that's a group like this. People who are in a group cannot be critical. They are credulous to a fault, open to influence. It doesn't have a critical faculty, and it doesn't exist for it. And as a result of that, you got to be very careful when you're talking to a group. Anyone who wishes to have an effect upon it needs no logical adjustment in his argument. He must paint it in the most forcible colors. He must exaggerate, and he must repeat the same thing again and again. And if you do that in a group, they're going to consider you to be a fabulous speaker, because you say the same thing over and over. And I got to confess to you, I do it in the courtroom. I pick a theme. I have the jury there, and I say, I'm going to repeat this thing over and over again. If I say it enough, they're going to believe me. Because they don't have the critical capability to analyze what is really happening. So let me give you some examples of this. Being a Republican, if you're going to campaign, you're not going to really say anything. You're just going to say, change we can believe in. And pretty soon, if you say that enough, people are going to go, yes, I like that guy. That's what we're going to do. And you got to exaggerate and be demonstrative. And I'm not like that at all. I'm kind of shy and withdrawn. But this is excellent, excellent way to sway a crowd. You have to marvel at a man like Mr. Obama, who says this over and over again to groups and never says what the change is going to be. Gets elected. And then what's he do? Well, I'm not talking about that. There are lots of other things like this too. I love this one. What part of no don't you understand? And it just has this nice feel to it. You say, yeah, how can you not understand it? No. How about this one? I hear this one a lot in the context of immigration. What part of illegal don't you understand? And people go, well, yeah, it's illegal for heaven's sakes. And I believe in the law. Well, you got to be careful when you hear things like this, because you need to do some analysis. You need to search your soul, yes. But first, you need to study it out in your mind. Now, I assume a lot of you are Mormons, so I'm going to do some things that I would not normally do in an environment like this. I would say, yeah, behold, I will tell you in your mind and your heart. And yet Oliver Cowdery couldn't translate the plates, and so the next section of Doctrine and Covenants says, you have not understood. You thought I would give it to you. You supposed you just get it. You didn't study it. You didn't work it out. And so I think that Mormons are particularly obligated, if you will, to study things out in their mind and not sit in a group like this and be swayed by someone like me. So I think what you need to do is take the time to go think about issues. Now, I've given you an essay that I've written. Now, the reason that I've done that is because it's easier to study something out in your mind when you're by yourself. Because you can read it, you can think it, and you can ponder it. Look at this. I was fascinated by this when I heard this last Sunday. This, of course, is by an apostle, Elder Bedenauer. And he talks about how you get revelation. It is this gradual process. I love this metaphor of the light in the rising sun instead of just flicking on the light bulb, because it takes time. It's line upon line, precept upon precept. I have a good friend of mine that when I talk about immigration, he says, I don't want to talk about it. I said, what do you mean you don't want to talk about it? He says, I know what I believe. I want fences at the border, and that's it. I don't want to hear. Well, I say he's not thinking. He is not using his mind. He is not doing what he needs to do. Now, part of thinking is you got to make sure it feels right. I started out undergraduate school as a physics major because I thought I was pretty good with mathematics. Turns out I was lousy with mathematics. There were people who were incredibly talented. But one thing I did learn was, when you got up into these upper division math classes, you worked through the answer, and then you stood back and you looked at it and said, does this make sense? It's not like adding 2 plus 2, that's 4, there's an answer. But when you get into higher differential equations in 5 and 6 dimensions in imaginary number systems, you got to say to yourself, does this make sense? Well, that's what we have to do when we talk about anything. And we're going to learn anything, we got to study it out in our mind, and then we got to feel in our heart if it makes sense. We've got to make sure that it does that. Now, why am I telling you all of this? I'm telling you this because I want you to know something about me. Because you have to have a perspective on the speaker. I once had an office manager who worked for me who was a Congregationalist. And she hated Mormons. And I said to her once, I said, well, why do you hate Mormons so? And she says, well, we learn about them at our church. I said, well, I said, maybe I can attend your class someday. And she said, no, I don't want you to attend the class at our church. I said, well, it seems to me that if you want to learn what someone believes, you don't go to a detractor and ask them. What you do is go to the strongest advocate of a position and ask them. So, why don't you let the missionaries come over to your house and they'll talk to you? No, she didn't want to do that. She was happy with what she was getting at her congregational church. So, now let me turn to immigration and talk about this, because we're going to lay a little bit of groundwork and then we're going to talk about perspective. You're not going to reach a conclusion tonight because you're going to remember the psychology of a group and what the speaker can do to you. You're going to be skeptical. You're going to leave here and you're going to think about it. Hopefully, read my essay and make an informed, intelligent decision and say, does this feel right to me? Now, one thing you are going to do is if you hear someone speaking and they repeat something like, well, what part of illegal don't you understand? And they repeat these same statements over and over again, and they don't go any deeper, you say to yourself, well, they've read Sigmund Freud. And they know they don't have to be logical. They know they don't have to have a rationale. It's like one of those lawyers in the courtroom who's just trying to convince you because they're an advocate. And so you must be very careful of people like me who are advocates. And I want you to be aware of that so you think and then worry about it. Okay, now, I'm going to talk about principles that govern immigration. And I have a few that I would like to share with you. They are, independence, freedom, free enterprise. What is a crime? What should be a crime? You know, if you haven't read Thomas Paine's Common Sense in a while, it's 40 pages. You ought to read it. The book was the most popular and widely sold book in 1776 that had ever occurred in the United States. In the first year, it sold almost 1 million copies. This is in 1776. It went through 25 editions. It made the publisher wealthy. Thomas Paine took all of the royalties as an offer and gave them to George Washington for the Continental Army. Didn't make a penny on it. It is the one document that did more to incite the Revolutionary War than anything else. And so occasionally you should go back and read it. It talks about the difference between society, how we get together and live as human beings, and government, how the government must function to regulate the society, leaving these people free to do what they want and to make sure that someone doesn't take advantage of them. That's the whole underpinnings of our government and our country. So let's talk about criminal laws for a minute. I had to make this because it's a technical legal term. You see, criminal laws traditionally require a particular type of evil. You don't make something criminal because you don't want them wearing a gray pinstripe suit. Someone wearing a gray pinstripe suit, how does that offend society? How does that keep you from being a social person with freedom to do what you want? Now, you just may not like gray pinstripe suits, and you can make it criminal if you're in the legislature. But typically, a crime requires a mens rea. That means an evil mind. You must be intending to do something bad against another person. Not only does it require a mens rea, it must also require a nocendi voluntas. That means you got to be doing, you got this evil mind, and then you're going to intentionally go and do it. I hate that guy, I'm going to go blow up his house. So you go blow up his house, and that is criminal. And there's not one of us in this room who doesn't understand that that is a crime and should be a crime because, well, you have an evil intent and you go do it. And that ought to be punished to control how we live in society. Well, I'm going to bring us forward in a minute to the criminal aspects of immigration law. And what you need to remember and have in your mind is it some sort of mens rea, intent to injure, and nocendi voluntas that animate deliberate antisocial acts. And you do this in the context, by the way, of the fact that, well, take you and me. Take our ancestors. When we started in 1776, well, we got our Constitution in 1892. You know, there weren't any immigration laws. Just weren't. You happened to come here, and you lived here for a while, and you became a citizen. It just kind of happened. The first Naturalization Act was in 1795, and what it said was only free white persons could become citizens, and they had to live here 5 years. So if you lived here 5 years and you're a free white person, you're automatically a citizen. 1801, that was amended to 14 years. 1802 went back to 5 years. In 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which gave us New Mexico and Arizona, took that away from Mexico. 80,000 Mexicans were made citizens, eo instantante. And then in 1870, whites the Naturalization Act of 1870 says that whites and Africans can be citizens, but for the first time, there's a restriction. No Asians. You can't be an Asian and be a citizen. I love Benjamin Franklin. Don't you all love him? What a patriot. Now, he did some things in France that we don't hear about particularly. But I love the key on the kite and the electricity, you know, and the lightning rods. Did you know Benjamin Franklin hated the Germans? He decided that there were swarms of Germans flooding Pennsylvania who wouldn't learn English, and he thought it was outrageous. This is in 1750s, by the way. And he wrote extensively about how to keep those daggum Germans out of America. Samuel Morse did the telegraph. He was so against the Catholics and Irish. He was part of what was called the nativist movement in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, and into the 1900s. Nativists believed, well, they formed the American Party in 1850. They ran people. They were the know-nothing party. They said, I know nothing but my country, my whole country, and nothing but my country. If you weren't born here, you can't be a citizen. And so they just wanted to exclude anybody coming here because they were the know-nothing party. And, well, they didn't do very much success. But then in 1882, we get the Chinese Exclusion Act. Again, we hate the Asians. And so this is a political cartoon from 1881 when the notable president, Chester Arthur, you all remember President Arthur, of course, he vetoed this bill a couple of times, but it caused such a furor and cry that he finally had to sign this bill that said if you're from Asia, if you're from Chinese, you can't come into the United States. And this is a typical political cartoon from the era. We've got the brand new Statue of Liberty coming into America. We've got the coolie, and you can't see it very well, but right here, this coolie is holding an opium pipe right here. And then he's got these kind of rays going out from his head there. And these rays say, filth, immorality, disease, ruin to white labor. That's what the argument was against the Chinese in 1881. Because everybody knew that these people were awful and should be kept out of our country. The hatred of the Irish continued into the 1920s. This is a political cartoon from 1928, and it's not a very good one, but here's a fence at the border. There's a sign over the door leading into the United States that says immigrants, and behind we have Rome, rum, and red. And Uncle Sam is saying, nothing doing. Because we ain't going to let these people into our country. You see, they're Irish Catholics. But they're awful. We don't want them here. They're like the Germans in Pennsylvania in the 1750s who didn't want to learn English. And yet, let me return, if I can, here just a second here, to this most important statement by, well, I have to find it. It's not a big deal here. Just a minute. I'll find it. Here it is. Our good friend Thomas Paine. What he says here is, the tumult soon subsides, and time makes more converts than reasons. You see, there's not a one of us here today who thinks that the Germans are evil, who thinks that Chinese are evil. if you read some of the stuff from the late 19th century about black people that was being published at Harvard and Yale and some of these great schools, you cannot believe what they were saying about these people. But we don't believe that today because we recognize with time that those very logical arguments are now not anything that we want to subscribe to. And so we have to be careful about what we're doing. We have to think about what should be criminal and what should not. Now there was a Quota Act in 1921. The Immigration Acts in the 1920s were awful. They established quotas. They said certain people couldn't come in, others people could. And the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924, Johnson-Reed Act, was based on eugenics. Eugenics was a popular theme at the time. Eugenics is that there's a pure race. And that if you're a nation, you should preserve the purity of your race. And this is what the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924 was about. And here's what Mr. Reed, Senator Reed, said on the floor of the Senate about this bill. This bill is for those of us who are interested in keeping American stock up to its highest standards. That is, people who were born here. Now, eugenics became an awful thing later on in the 30s and 40s in Europe, because there was a particular country who bought off on the eugenics that started in the United States. The particular head of that particular country even quoted what was happening to Mormons in the United States as justification for what he was doing to preserve the highest standards of keeping his country pure because of the people. Well, it's awful. We don't buy into this. Here's the problem that you got to think about when it comes to immigration. What are we trying to do? What is the undergirding purpose of these laws? Why are there restrictions on the number of immigrants? Why do we say that the Catholics or the Irish or the Chinese shouldn't be here? Why do we want to, as they wanted to back then, build a fence? Here's the problem from an economic standpoint. Let me switch to that for a minute. Economics creates a tidal wave of demand. People don't go to a country because they just think it would be nice. They go there because there's something there they want, and they have a demand for that, whether it's religious freedom, the freedom to get a job that they want, the freedom to work. That's what people do. And so you got to be careful that you don't enact laws that you simply can't enforce. I like King Canute. King Canute was the ruler of much of Denmark, British Isles in AD 1000, and he built a throne on the seashore. And he was so irritated because the tide would come in and get his shoes wet. And so he, as king, commanded the seas to stop. And he didn't. And so he said, well, I guess who's really king is the one who can command the seas, and they will obey. It is not me. Enacting laws that conflict with economic reality, with pressure, result in what we have to call a black market. And I'll give you a perfect example of a black market. A black market is, I have to hire someone at a certain wage, or I've got to pay them certain benefits, and I've got a guy who comes to my house to do repairs. This is a true story. To do repairs on my house, a workman, and he says, well, tell you what, there's two prices. No. He says, well, yeah, I have a regular job, and I pay enough in taxes. Oh, you know? Yeah. So if you pay me in cash, the price is this much. But if you give me a check, it's this much. That's called a black market. He wants to work off the books. Now, this is a white guy. A skilled craftsman. I was so angry that he had the ability to decide whether he would pay taxes or not. I gave him a check and sent him a 1099. Just so made me angry. Well, I look at people who deal with the economics of immigration. Take the Cato Institute. The Cato Institute is one of the most conservative organizations in the United States. The Cato Institute can't be more of an enemy to liberals. It is conservative. It is, I am so right-wing, I'm right of Genghis Khan. And right next to me is the Cato Institute. And yet the Cato Institute does not understand why there are restrictions on immigration, because it makes no sense from an economic standpoint. And we have history here in Arizona that shows it so. When there's lots of work to be done, lots of people come to America to do the work. The work's done, they go back. Think about this. I have people who are so desperate for work and are willing to work at such wage rates that they will walk across the Sonoran Desert in the summer to get here to get a job. That is a tidal wave, folks, of demand. And if you're King Canuck, you realize you can't stop that wave. So it makes no sense to pass a law that is inconsistent with reality. What about Milton Friedman as my hero? Milton Friedman wrote a book called Freedom to Choose. If you haven't read Milton Friedman's book, you got to read it. It is the Bible for conservative economic thinkers. It was Ronald Reagan's book. He read it all the time while he was in the presidency. And I quote him in my essay, says, well, what you got to do, you got to make sure that you open the borders to let people come, because it is crazy to try to stop the tidal wave from coming up on the beach. This is Jason Riley. Jason Riley is a member of the Wall Street Journal editorial board. He has written this book called Let Them In. Now, if you want to exercise your mind, if you want to task yourself with seeing what the arguments are that you should follow, then what you should do is read Jason Riley's book. And you shouldn't be afraid to do it. You know, I sent my essay to Russell Pierce because he's the president of the Senate. He is the Senate president for me. He is my president in the Senate. And I sent it with a very nice cover letter. Dear Mr. Pierce, you are my representative. You control my Senate. I want you to read my essay and please tell me where I am wrong. Nada. I wish Mr. Pierce would write me back. Now, I don't want him to speak to me in a group like this because I'm concerned about the Sigmund Freud effect. Because I have heard people like him just pound the table, say the same thing over and over again. You know, I heard our governor talk about people being beheaded in the desert. And I go, huh? I never thought that. And so then I'm trying to figure out where it is. And I couldn't find it. You know, if you're a politician, it's kind of like being in a courtroom. You don't have to have facts. You don't have to have logic. You just kind of go ahead and say it. Well, so I have some sections in my essay, and I'm going to speed through this now because I want to get to the Mormon part, and then I want to have questions. You can read this. I have several things in my essay that I think are important for us to look at. Some people, like my brother, and many in my family say, we just got to keep these people out. Let's circle the wagon, let's build a fence, let's maintain the status quo. We don't want this new blood. Sounds like nativism of the late 1800s. It sounds like eugenics is what it sounds like, and I talk about that. Well, let's maintain work for citizens. I believe in a free enterprise system. What do you mean, maintain work for citizens? Because if you just say, well, they're taking our jobs, you go, well, what jobs are they taking? Because there sure seems to be a lot of work for them to do here. And not only that, when they do the work, they earn money, they spend the money. It increases our tax base. You have to look at this quote right here. This is an objective analysis done by the comptroller of the state of Texas. Now, state of Texas has more undocumented Hispanics than any other state in the Union, save California. And so the comptroller decided that she would do an analysis of what happened there. 1.4 million undocumented immigrants. If they weren't there, the loss to the state would be $17.7 billion. And the revenues collected from immigrants exceed what the state spends on them by almost $500 million. You think about this, think about what happens with Social Security. You know, many illegal immigrants, you know, they get these false Social Security cards. And each year the Social Security Administration gets all these donations that they don't know what to do. $6 to $7 billion a year the Social Security Administration gets from people who, well, they're using numbers that don't work, but, you know, they're paying the taxes. These people aren't expected to get any benefits from this. And the thing that has always puzzled me is people say, well, you know, they come here and they get free medicine, all that stuff. You'll see in my essay that there are some statistics that show that they don't use medical care as much as citizens do. They're much less likely to be on welfare because guess what? They gotta work. They know, don't work, don't eat. They don't live in this same entitlement world that we live in, and I wish we didn't live in. So they work their guts out, not expecting that they do things like this, pay all this Social Security money into there. It's a good thing that the Social Security people have that. Now, you don't hear that from an advocate who says, my gosh, they're taking jobs away. There was a late night television program on Saturday night. And in the Saturday night program, there was a parody of an illegal immigrant who had walked across the border, taking the job of the president of this corporation, who is now having to bust tables in a restaurant because this immigrant has taken his job. But you don't understand that what happens is when these people get jobs, there's a multiplier effect. They buy food. In this room tonight, there's an owner of a grocery store that caters to Hispanics. It's a very large store. And all these Hispanics go there. Rancho Market, you ought to go there if you haven't, because Rancho Market is a great grocery store. Let me do that little ad. But what happens when we have things like Senate Bill 1070, and we're treating these people like they are dross and refuse? Their business goes down. They're not expanding. What happens to the apartments that are holding those people? They lose tenants. Those landlords go out of business. The Rancho Market is not buying food from other domestic suppliers. They had plans to expand a couple of years ago. They haven't because their business is down so far. And yet, all we can think about is, right here in illegal alien, let's round up everybody at Payway and throw them out and close down all the Payways. Well, I like Payway. And I cannot think that anybody who is working there at the Payway is a criminal, is doing something that is asocial, that is interfering with our society. Well, what about crime? I'm going to do this. I'm almost done. I'm sorry. One of the problems that we always hear about is that immigrants bring crime. Well, if you go do some analysis, and lawyers do this, you know, somebody says something like this, you go, okay, let me go check that out. Let me go find the records. Let me go get the actual statistics, and you will find that After years of witnessing a rise in the number of illegal immigrants in their state, people are in reality less likely to be victims of crime than any time in the past 4 decades. Tell me, do any of you in this room feel less safe today than you did 4 years ago when you're out walking around? According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the violent crime rate in 2008 was the lowest it had been since 1971, notwithstanding all the beheadings that are going on in the desert. I'm being facetious here. Phoenix had the lowest crime rate in 2008 among similarly sized cities in the United States. Yeah, we got crime here. And you know what? I think we ought to catch those criminals, put them up against the wall, and shoot them. You know, I'm a proponent of the death penalty. I am outraged that people would do things that are asocial, that interfere with my freedom. And shoot them, that's a little extreme. That's hyperbolic. Lawyers do that, you see. They exaggerate. Remember? That's what Mr. Freud said people like me do. So you have to be careful when you hear it, because it may not be true. But if you're going to believe that Hispanics are increasing our crime here because they walked across the desert to get a job, you're drinking the Kool-Aid, folks. I just don't get it. Here's another. This is a piece published out of the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal is a pretty conservative publication. And it is amazing to me that people think that there is some sort of crime wave associated with these people. And I'll confess to you, I'll confess. I know at least 50 families who are illegal immigrants. The reason I know them is I was the young men's president of the Spanish branch. I speak Spanish. I worked with them. I love these people. You know, these guys work their guts out to get jobs to support their family. And I'm thinking, gee, if everybody in America were like these people, we would not have the problems that we have. Okay. Doesn't work. Okay, let's talk about religion. I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm going to talk about religion. I'm sorry, you who are not Mormons, you can go get refreshments or something. I'm just amazed about what makes things crime. For example, you know, don't you, that in the early 1500s, it was a crime to even possess a vernacular Bible. It was a capital offense if you held in your hands a Bible written in English. They would summarily execute you. That's why William Tyndale fled to Europe. He wrote the first big translation. The Geneva Bible of 1550, which is the Bible that gives us the versification, the verses that we've got in our King James Version of the Bible today, was called the Geneva Bible because it was done in Geneva, Switzerland, because you couldn't do it in England because you would be killed if you did it in England. What about, well, do you think that's just? Think that's really a criminal law to possess that Bible? You know, what about England and King George? You know, we have Thomas Paine, who published Common Sense anonymously because he knew he would be hanged as a traitor and not revered as a patriot. And so he was very scared for his life, and he did that. Well, was there anything wrong with him writing that? What about we're living in Germany in the 1940s, and there's a law that says you cannot harbor Jews, you'll be killed. Is that a law that we're going to honor, obey, and sustain? What about the internment of the Japanese in World War II? Is that a criminal law? What are we doing here? Now, time gives us some perspective on these things. How about Rosa Parks? She refused to get up and move to the back of the bus and give somebody a seat. Was she a criminal? No, time tells us that she was. Joseph Smith, you know, was a fugitive. he was arrested and taken to Carthage. And yet most Mormons don't consider that he really was a fugitive because it was an unjust imprisonment. Now, notwithstanding that, we've got this article of faith, 12:1, that says we believe in being kings, presidents, rulers, men, obey and honor. I can't tell you how many times someone has quoted this to me when it comes to immigration. Don't you believe in honoring the state of the law? What part of illegal don't you understand? I say to them, well, you know, that's very good for a general statement, but let's be careful about it, because if we look at the Doctrine and Covenants, it says, we believe that the commission of crime should be punished according to the nature of the offense, according to their criminality and tendency to evil among men. What kind of evil among men does it have to have someone here getting a job and working, and for the public peace and tranquility? This sounds like Thomas Paine. This sounds like the founders of our Constitution. And to use their ability to bring in offenders against good laws to punishment. We're obligated to think about whether this is a good law or a bad law. That's what we've got to do. Tell me, is it a good law that breaks up families? Is it a good law that says, no, you can't work here, and I'm sorry, but you know, you've got to go back to Mexico, and I don't care that your daughter was born here. We're going to. I'm just amazed by that. You check. Well, what's the church's position? The church, in last November, published this statement in conjunction with the Utah Compact. This is a fascinating statement because it says some principles that we want to love our neighbors, we want to recognize the ever-present need to strengthen families, we acknowledge the nation has the right to enforce its laws and secure its borders, and I believe that. You know, you don't want somebody who's a terrorist coming in here. You don't want somebody intent upon doing some sort of social offense. I don't want somebody coming here and blowing up buildings or running planes into buildings in downtown New York or the Pentagon. Those are evil people, and they should be held accountable for that. But it also says public officials should create laws, administer laws that reflect the best of our aspirations of a just and caring. This is the church saying this, by the way. Such laws will properly balance love for neighbors, family cohesion, the observance of just and enforceable laws. Does just and enforceable mean good laws? Was it evil to rebel against King George? It was unlawful. How about this? This is Utah, just a few weeks ago. And there are people in this room who were involved in this effort. Passed some immigration laws that give illegal immigrants, people without documents, driver's licenses. They give them work permits. It was passed by a legislature that is 80% Mormon. It's not happenstance that happened. And then, at the signing of these bills, we have the presiding bishop of the Mormon Church who speaks, and he says, our presence here testifies to the fact that we are appreciative of what has happened in the legislature this session. Now, I thought it was curious that this did not appear in the Deseret News. You know, the church owns the Deseret News. And so I looked at the Deseret News, it wasn't there. But I looked at the Salt Lake Tribune, and it was there. Because the Salt Lake Tribune, you know, is considered to be the heathen newspaper up there. The religious editor for the Salt Lake Tribune is Peggy Fletcher Stack, a brilliant woman who has been my friend since before high school. And Peggy and I are close correspondents, and we talk a lot. And Peggy ran the story of the church appearing and Bishop Burton speaking at the signing ceremony, endorsing it. And I go to myself, well, I said to Peggy, well, why did the church do that? She says, well, you know, they don't want to make too big a problem about that. Okay, and now what do? I worked in the Spanish branch. And the Spanish branch had young men who didn't have papers, and our church called them on missions. Didn't send them by airplane in their field of labor, sent them by car, so they wouldn't need to show their ID. I quote Spencer W. Kimball in here, or Eddie Kimball in his book about Spencer W. Kimball, the president, who was sitting with the Quorum of 12, talking about whether we could baptize people who were here illegally. Because half the brethren thought, well, that's a crime, we can't do that, and the other half said no, and so, in a rare instance of not seeking compromise, after these discussions, which were fiery and incendiary on both sides of the issue, President Kimball said, we will baptize them. And we do. And that was the end of that. And so I ask you, are these good laws? I was in a, well, you know, I've run out of time, I've gone, well, no, I got 2 more minutes. I'll say that. Again, religious. I was, I fly an airplane. I'm a pilot. I fly 250, 300 hours a year. I use it in my work. I love it. I was flying from Calgary, Alberta, down to Boise, Idaho, because there was a young man who had had a stroke up there, and he needed transport back to the United States. And it was almost impossible. We had to get him out of the socialized medical scheme of Canada because he would have died there. And so it was a distant relative at law. And they knew I had a plane where you could put someone down a stretcher. I flew up there. We loaded him into the plane in Calgary. I took off, flew into Boise, and he is alive and well today, rather than dead and buried. But as I flew over the border from Canada, I flew over a lake that transected the border. Same lake. I gotta tell you, there's no fence through that lake. And I watched a boat that was apparently fishing go from one side of the lake across the border to the other. I knew right where the border was because I have very sophisticated navigational equipment in my airplane that says where the border was. And so I watched the boat go by, and then I watched another boat go this way. And I asked my friend who thinks we ought to build a fence in the southern border, why don't we build one in Canada? He said, well, that's not the problem. I guess it's because they're white like us. And we don't need a fence up there. And so I asked you, is this good, what we're trying to do with immigration? I want you to think about it. I want you to read my essay. My website is on there. You can go there and you can get my email address. If you have questions, email me. When we started tonight, a lady came in and she said, I don't know why you used the church to advertise this meeting. And she was quite offended by it as well. I guess she could be. And yet, our church thinks this is a moral issue, not a political one. I don't believe that, this is Daryl, this is Williams 1 and 5. I don't believe you can be a good Mormon and hate illegal immigrants and want to deport them and break up families and leave children without their parents here. I don't believe you can be a good Mormon and be a nativist and think that, like Senator Reed did in the 1920s, let's preserve our race and not have this melting pot that has flavored the stew of America and made us great. That's what we are. That's why this hysteria about immigration is a conundrum to me. That's why I wrote my essay. So that when my brother or others send me emails telling me these horrible things, and I know they've read about Freud, because I know so much is so credible on the internet. I send them a copy of my email, of my essay, and say, here, you respond to this. And if you've got some good arguments, then maybe I will join you and go down there with my gun and keep those people out. I was giving a high council talk in Warren, Paradise Valley, and I mentioned that I don't think our Father in heaven gives 2 cents about an international border. It is His children, and we are His brothers and sisters. And so we should be acting like it. So enough religion. I'm done. I'm available for questions.
A lot of the calls that I was getting, people had several questions, and so I guess right now we're going to go ahead and take some questions.
Yeah, you got some questions, hit me with them.
Give them the hardest one.
Come on, take a shot at me.
Go ahead, just raise your hand. And
Yes, sir.
I love Hispanics. I don't find anything wrong with the Utah Compact, but from reading it, I don't come to the same conclusions at all that you do. Your logic that brings you to your conclusions is a quantum leap in logic. I expected to hear something academic tonight. This is so poorly. If this has anything to do with the logic you've used, I won't waste my time reading it.
Well, let me ask you to do this. I want you to read it, because my essay is certainly more scholarly than this oral presentation that you have heard. And I challenge
I would hope so.
It is. It is well researched, it is well footnoted, and I want you to read it. And if you would do me the courtesy, please, if you see something in there that's wrong, I want you to email me or write me and say, Daryl, you're stupid, and here's why. Because my mind is open. I think many people have minds like steel traps, but they are rusted shut. I want to have an open mind about this. You know, the federal laws that make immigrants illegal are not criminal. They are civil. That's why you don't see people doing anything other than just deporting them, because it's not a criminal law to cross the border.
Excuse me, is this getting better?
Is it getting better?
Yeah.
The civil law?
Are you going to give me something better than you're giving me right now?
Yes, if you read my essay, please.
I guess I'll have to do that.
You do, because I told you at the very beginning that you can't listen to someone speaking and buy it. You got to be a skeptic. And here's another thing that happens with group. Group comes with their prejudice. And like Thomas Paine said here at the beginning, one of the biggest problems that you have is that a habit of not thinking something is right makes it very difficult then to get a formidable outcry as defense. And there are lots of examples about that. And so please read it.
The main problem I have, you use, I mean, some of the things you presented here are right, but then you twist them and come to a completely different, your logic jumps from, I don't.
Well, that's your opinion.
Well, okay. He's entitled to his opinion.
That other opinion.
Thank you.
What do you have a
Whoa.
problem with? What one thing do you have a problem with so he can address it? I mean, yeah.
You missed the first half where he talked about
Well,
economics.
but
You're speaking in generalities, give us specifics.
The simple fact that I don't think anybody has a problem with the immigrants that come across looking for a job. That's not the issue. I don't have any problem with,
That's most of the
and
people.
I don't want to,
That's 99% of them.
Yeah, that's most of the people.
That's why they're coming.
well, then I don't have a problem with 99% of it then.
Well, a lot of people do.
Okay, let me just sort of let me refer you to something that's in my essay. I talk about the Bracero problem, Bracero program of the 1950s and early 60s, which legalized people. Illegal immigration dropped from almost 99% during that period because under the Bracero program, we just let anyone come through the door, through the border, and we didn't have illegal immigrants. And then we eliminated that program, and suddenly we have illegal immigrants again. And do you think I'm excited about having a law that makes someone who walks across the desert to get a job illegal? No.
I just want to know who it is coming across the border so that we can determine what to do with them. I think it's
But the
dangerous.
problem is we're not letting people come over who want jobs.
Okay, let me tell you what. I've got a solution. I've got a solution.
Better than what's.
Bracero program, immigration
Okay,
reform.
let's lose control. Let's lose. I'll give a solution. And I use this at the very end of my essay. Our border restrictions are like a roadblock, an accident on the road. And you're driving down the road and traffic is backed up because there's an accident. What you want to do is leave the road and cut through the neighborhoods to get around the accident.
That's a pathetic analogy. It really is. It's so shallow.
Sir, I'm
Give
sorry,
me-
but we're going to accept.
Okay. Please.
Next question,
You're
Claire,
I'm
hijacking.
sorry, you had a chance.
I want to leave. I was leaving. I want to leave. I don't want to waste any
I'm
more
sorry.
time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you.
Next question.
Oh, take my essay though. Take my essay. Read it. Okay. Any other questions?
That one over there in the gray shirt.
Okay. Let's do this lady right here. She's been very patient.
He does not report my comments.
She doesn't.